Good evening. Thanks for coming to the Climate and Scrutiny Subcommittee this evening. Item 1, have we got any apologies for absence?
We've got apologies from councillors Campagna and Ainsley.
Thank you. And are there any members' interests to declare for tonight's meeting? None? Okay, thank you. So main item of business today is the report from the Assistant Director for Climate and Growth, Amanda Parrott, setting out a draft response to Essex County Council's consultation on the local nature recovery strategy. This consultation closes on the 25th of October, and Ms Maria Hensey, the Senior Planning Policy Officer, is here this evening. Could you please introduce the report?
Hi everyone. So just a bit of background. The Environment Act came in 2021, and that's what introduced what's called the Nature Recovery Networks, which is the national goal basically of the government to reverse nature decline. And from that, 48 responsible authorities fell out of that. So what their role is to do is to create local nature recovery strategies. So that's to link up habitats to create more connected, strategic, coherent networks across the country. So Essex County Council is the responsible authority for the Greater Essex area. So they have prepared a draft local nature recovery strategy, which I'll call an LNRS from now on. So that looks to identify strategic networks and opportunities to create the bigger, better and more connected habitats. So that's across Essex, not just Castle Point. So an LNRS, it links to biodiversity net gain, which is known as BNG. So it's a way to direct biodiversity into the areas that have been identified as strategic, and it provides incentives for BNG to be provided in those locations, and it also de-incentivises BNG or development within those locations. So obviously Essex County Council are consulting on this document. Castle Point is a supporting authority, so Castle Point, along with all the other local authorities within Essex, are a supporting authority, and Natural England. So once it's adopted, it will cover the area in Castle Point, and it will impact planning decisions in the future, and we'll have to take account of the LNRS in that. So the consultation started on the 30th of August, and we've drafted a response to that consultation and welcome feedback on that and any input from this committee. The main issues that were raised are some points of clarification on the mapping. So there were some areas that we thought were errors within the mapping that's they've provided, potentially missed opportunities that we think could be included within that, and potential issues of delivery of some of the areas that they've identified. Also looked for more details on the action planning. There's some sections on that in the document, and seeking more clarification on the impacts to planning from the LNRS. So there's some certain points around council-owned land, so in particular around the waterside farm leisure centre area that's been identified as quite a few area of habitats. So a bit of, we just identified that in the report, and we're looking for implementation, monitoring and review, more details for that. So the consultation closes on the 25th of October, and following this committee, we're hoping to take that to Cabinet to formally approve, to get a response to Essex County Council before the consultation closes. So we welcome any of your comments in this.
Peter.
When you're talking about areas, when you was talking about areas, I say me and Tim was talking about something. I got the Forestry Commission to work with the council, and we went round and planted the first trees in residential areas. And that really was a win-win, because one, the police asked me to do them, because certain areas in my ward is high in antisocial behaviour problems. And they said planting trees in the residential areas pretties the area up, and it actually reduces, don't stop it, but reduces antisocial behaviour. It also reduces rubbish being dumped, and it pretties up the area and gives back community pride. And then it's also good for wildlife because, you know, more birds are in the trees and all that. And then the trees, so we're being told, helps with cleaning the air. So looking at residential areas, I think could be a win-win.
Thank you.
So Essex have included, so obviously the LNRS looks at the sites that are already designated for nature. So you get the more designated ones, so like triple SIs, local wildlife sites. And the LNRS is trying to find ways to connect those sites, and that's where it creates the strategic opportunity areas. So it's more to get those connections. But they did identify, because obviously some areas in Essex are quite built up. So Southend and Harlow, for example, were very built up. So they introduced what they've called, so it's an urban opportunity areas. So they have, they don't technically fall within the strategic areas, but they're obviously benefits of having those. So they have identified that within the document. I can't find it whereabouts it is, but they have a map for that. So it's whether you want us to look at potentially where there's more urban opportunities that maybe they might have missed, because they do identify some in Castle Point.
I know it is a bit of a hassle because when Ryan Lynch was here, I got him involved and we went out and looked at the green areas because, you know, being in residential areas, there's cables, pipes under the green areas. So we had to check where they were safe to plant them and that. And as I say, I'm working with the Forestry Commission, really did help boost it. So that was Tom Moat, who I worked with then.
So it might just be important to note as well that obviously the LNRS is a document, it's a strategic document, but there's also the Castle Point plan where we can look to bring forward stuff like that. So in the issues and options consultation, we had a part about urban greening. So that is how we can plant more in urban spaces and create that and have the benefits that you've mentioned. So the crime and disorder and vandalism, but also making those nature things. So that's something we can look at through the Castle Point plan as well.
Tim, I'll be specific.
Thank you. First of all, just like to say, I think it's a good project. That nature's in decline in the country and in Essex, so it's good to have a strategy to address that and try and turn that around. I thought the key points, a lot of the key points that I would raise have been picked up in the officers' sort of feedback to Essex, so that was good. But if I could just sort of zone in on a few of them, if nothing, just to emphasise. So, for example, I think it's on 5.7 on your thing that you've highlighted that they haven't picked up, or they don't appear to have picked up through the mapping, the woodland in the Dawes Heath area, which I agree. I struggled a bit with the mapping, to be honest, trying to work out which bits were which and how much they picked up on. But that seemed to be a complete, like either they were not aware, and so it'd be good to make them aware. I just do speak a bit more about that, only because I'm very, very familiar with that area, Dawes Heath. But there are principles that roll out across the whole borough. Is that in Dawes Heath we have something called living landscapes, which is it ties in a lot with this, in that it's areas of nature that are linked together, if you like, through green pathways. So one piece of land butts up to some woodland, and that woodland butts up to another bit of woodland, and so forth and so forth. And I've always thought that was a good foundation, but it needs firming up and sort of some protection around it. And also, if you look at that area and their maps, it's some of it is like seems to be designated as a wildlife area, and then there's huge chunks either side of Dorset Road which are not. Now that doesn't make sense to me because it's the same kind of habitat and wildlife thing. So I'm agreeing that you've spotted something that's an omission or something not right, and I'm glad you have. But I'm saying while we're focusing on that, a bit more work on that specific would be helpful. There's a few other things I could say, but that's my first sort of thought.
If you wish to carry on with any other points, and I'll follow up with my few. I'm sure you'll cover some of them.
Okay, so just leading on from that, talking about specific areas. The area marked on the map that I would call the gliders area seems to be saying that this will be a prime spot for marine life. Now it's a hill, so I don't think the fishes. I know salmon goes uphill and all upstream, but I don't think that's either a mistake. So the question then goes to my head: were they correctly trying to highlight it as something, but put the wrong one on? I.e., it should be a woodland or a wildlife area. It would be nice to know about that, because I think I'm right in saying that at the moment that what we think of as that area near sort of south of Gliders, in reality is mixed woodland and grassland, which is teeming with wildlife, and yet doesn't have any official wildlife designation, to the best of my knowledge. So whether that's an internal Castle Point matter as well as feedback on this, I don't know. But if that is the case, I think that should be addressed. So that was my point on that. Another point I would make is, again, it's perhaps a spin-off of this and not necessarily a complete response to the consultation, but that we need more of these APIBs, these wildlife areas, to be identified and designated, because there's a lot more in the borough than is actually recognised as such, which does dovetail in with this kind of work in my mind. So that was another point. The other big one for me is because when you look at the fundamentals of this, it says to create networks of bigger, better, more connected habitats, and it makes the point that we've been losing land, we've been losing space to agriculture or property development, etc., etc. So wildlife areas are diminishing, and it says that it's not good enough just to halt the decline. We need to increase biodiversity in other areas, which is great and admirable, but I don't even think we're winning the battle of halting the decline. And I think there's a correlation with planning that crosses over between these two things. So, for example, it mentions, or possibly you mentioned in your response, that if you had a situation that, say, you were going to have a property development and it's going to be in an area next to a wildlife zone, say, for want of a better word, you might have to say, oh, well, that property, because it's going to be damaging, it's got to generate a higher BNG or whatever. I would like to go further and say that if something's going to be damaging to an existing area, that is reason to say, whoa, this isn't an appropriate place for development, rather than just saying, yeah, you can wipe out that wildlife, but you've got to do something else somewhere else that increases BNG. So I think there's a link between this and development, and the things network back together. That might nearly be it. You'll be pleased to know. Let me just check. Yes, I just also put that it was picked up that they were talking about you could possibly do something nature-wise near the oil and gas terminals, which I thought might not be, because we've had other briefings saying that that's a key national infrastructure thing. So it might, it might be suitable for something, but not necessarily suitable for this kind of nature recovery. But that's the key points I wanted to convey. Thanks.
Thank you. I think certainly some of those aspects are covered in the report, in the response to the report. So if you want to highlight where you've covered them, and I've got a couple more questions myself afterwards.
So thank you for those points. So you're right about the Dawes Heath mapping in particular. So we've raised that in particular about woodland opportunities. So if you think that maybe that's something we should look at in a bit more for different habitats. So in the response, we've put about Dawes Heath that we're surprised that there's not opportunity areas within that, but we can amend that to include the living landscape for them to kind of report back to that, because there's a bit which was like a new addition. So they consulted us in June and made slight amendments, because they consulted with us in June to approve the LNRS for consultation, and they made amendments for that. So there's new sites which were selected by local authorities based on other local authorities' comments. And with that, they've identified sites that have action points within it. So if the living landscapes is something that we can cross-reference to that might be a way for us to put a site that might be included. So yeah, we can I'll write that as a note for the Dawes Heath mapping to include the living landscapes and see what opportunities there are with that. In terms of the area of marine by the gliders, we know that's a hill, so that didn't make much sense. So we've included that, but we haven't said about if it's something else, so we can ask them to have a look at that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I think that even though that's almost comical, that what they've come up with, they're accidentally or whatever, there is something there in the spec that needs a bit more attention drawing to it. Beyond the fact that no, this isn't suitable for marine life. So that would be great. Again, if you could just add to it, so to speak.
It makes sense because I think Amanda was checking, but it was previously identified as a potential local wildlife site. So there's something around there. So we can amend the response to ask them to say we don't think it's marine, but can you see if it's something else? In terms of the AIPBs, so they've got a list of what falls into an AIPB. So you have the SSSI, your special protection areas, local wildlife sites, nature reserves. So there's kind of a set standard, and it's for every local authority that the same sites are inputted into that. So I guess the only way it would change is if more local wildlife sites are included within it.
Can I just interact a little bit on that? Because I think that's perfectly fair what you just said, and I understand it. But for example, as I say, maybe it's a bit of work at our end, but it's sort of springboarded from this, if you like, that local wildlife sites, I'm convinced that we've got more of them that are quite legitimately very good local wildlife sites, but they haven't been designated. And I think that would be a positive thing for us to do. But yeah, thanks.
Then just in terms of your comments around the development process and the local nature recovery strategy, the consultation that's currently underway on the National Planning Policy Framework reforms does ask a question around how these two should interact, and we have responded around that particular point to make sure that they do receive high attention in the consideration of plan making and decision taking. So we have pushed that back to government because that's not something that the LNRS can do. It is something that needs to come from national policy in terms of plan making.
So I just have one more point on the oil and gas receptors. So we've included that within the response because, we picked up, we don't know how deliverable that would be, but I think it might have come from when they've worked out the different habitats and how they've selected them. So for most of them, well, basically all of them, they pick the top 15%, but because there were so few marine opportunities, they included 100% of them. So that might be why that's included. So they might have to look at that. So maybe it's around the wording of the methodology for that.
Thank you. I mean, if I can dive in now, I recognise that you've picked up problems with the mapping. I think overall, we're a very densely populated borough. I think we could probably benefit from using smaller size hexagons to actually get some granularity on this. Unfortunately, we have patches of woodland, not extensive rural landscape. If the objective is to link up patches, I think we need to identify them accurately and come up with a plan that meets that objective. So I would ask them to do the mapping on a more detailed scale. With my understanding of this model is that you should readily be able to break those hexagons down into smaller chunks, because that's the whole design of the standard. So maybe we can ask them for more granularity, and that should resolve some of the problems around Waterside, Benfleet Creek, gliders. Just picking up on gliders, there is a woodland there at the end of the road on the right-hand side, which has evolved over the last sort of 25, 30 years. So it's a small, fairly dense, scrubby woodland that probably has been included in the local planning consultation as woodland, because I know the residents up there have been very keen to protect that. So that leads me on to say that I would like to see all of our sites that have been included in local plan evidence put forward for incorporation in this, because otherwise we're just duplicating work. And then that will hopefully cover my next point, that in addition to the places mentioned, Poundwood, etc., in the response, it doesn't appear to me that Fundersley Glen's covered at all. That's ancient woodland. Fundersley Common, sparse woodland though it is, it's already a protected site, so it may be actually included. But obviously the glen on both sides and then extending through Fundersley Common, etc., to the water tower is Shipwrights Wood as well, which goes down into Fundersley Glen. But if you go from the A13 towards Rayleigh through to Church Road, and then the other side of there, the woodland goes right the way through to the Fundersley Common area and the water tower. So that's quite an important link. And behind Kent's School, there's a large patch of woodland that's so Felstead Road should also be included, which goes from Felstead Road through to Clarence Road North. And overall, I think it's a good response, saying that we need some clarity on measurement, implementation, funding. All of that's a little vague, and I think you're absolutely right to pick up on it, because if this is actually going to have effect, it needs funding, and it needs us all to agree how we're going to know when it's working, what success looks like. So thank you for the report.
So if I just take what you said, so in terms of the hexagons, so they have included reasons why, and I think it's to do with land ownership, but we can ask them, obviously as we're a small authority, because hexagons make up quite a big part of it, so if we can make that smaller, include that.
Will you surely just end up with somebody owning more hexagons? That's a gain.
In terms of other sites to look at, so gliders, which corresponds to Councillor Copsey's point, Thundersea Glen, Thundersea Common, extending to the water tower and behind Kent's School. Is that right? I've picked up.
I mean, the Thundersea water tower, but it obviously it basically goes water tower to water tower if you look at it.
Okay. And in terms of the local plan evidence work, is that, so I guess what we've done for the evidence work is we've updated the local wildlife site review, and actually I've had an update since writing this report. So in terms of local wildlife sites, they have to be ratified by a local nature partnership, which is at Essex County Council, and that's going next month. So the AIPBs that they used for it should be updated in the latest version with the most up-to-date work. But is there anything else in the local evidence?
Can we seek an assurance that that process will happen?
Yeah, so we can amend that in the response just to make sure that it's included. And is there any other part in the local plan evidence base? Obviously, we've got our open space strategy, which looks at BNG sites.
Yeah.
So that.
I mean, our BNG policy is what it is. We've recently approved it. I don't know if this needs a reference to that in there. It's probably de facto. We'll obviously have to cooperate with people where areas span boundaries. Peter, you've got another question for us?
So it's just picking up on the gas and oil. I mean, that could be a win-win because we've got a triple SSI site on Canby, and that was going to be a refinery. I actually worked over there when I just left school at 16. So, and now that's a triple SSI site, Canby Wick. Yeah. And over at Colour Gas, I had a meeting over there in the week with Laurie, the other councillor, and they showed us all round. And there's massive green areas over there, and they're going to reduce the tanks over there. They're only going to have 5 tanks over there, so that could be a win-win. I know they said they're going to look at putting solar panels in, but again, you know, working with them, it could be a win-win to get more green areas and that, and the same with Oikos as well. Because as I say, they have got big green areas round them, so...
I mean, yeah, it's a good point. If it's preferred, we could amend it to remove that, because obviously the marine areas was the one that they've identified the least amount of habitats. So if that's something we could, because then it encourages, where there is any development, it would encourage more biodiversity in that.
And I'd suggest it's probably worth querying whether there's been any test, as you say, any testing's been done for deliverability, because it is a port. So I just, if we're going to propose anything, it's got to be viable. So that testing needs to happen, whether at this stage of the project or another time. Okay, the decision we have been asked to make tonight is whether we put the report forward as is or amended. My sense of the meeting is that we're suggesting amendments. So can I have a proposer that we move forward with an amended report incorporating the suggestions that we've made tonight? And a seconder?
I'll propose it.
Thank you. And I get the sense that we don't need to vote, but are we all in favour of that? Yes. Thank you very much. That concludes our business for tonight. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for a clear report and the work that's gone into that. And I wish you all good night. Thank you.